Hi everybody. Today we're going to be talking about education as discipleship. Oops. So before we jump in, we're going to just do a little bit of background and kind of vision casting. We're going to think about the church's role in education through the ages. Historically, the church has been at the forefront of education. This is well back into the early days of the church. Europe's first education revolution was in the 7th century, and the church was instrumental in establishing places of learning. So before that, very few people could read or write, and those who could were often elite class of leaders, of kings, bishops, the high end of church leadership. And in the 7th century, there was a move for greater numbers of people to be able to read and write in the establishment of monastery schools across Europe. And for the first time, a large number of people were able to access education. Obviously, this was not widespread education. The vast majority of people across Europe at this time were still illiterate, but this was a big step forward. The second education revolution happens during the Reformation. So we all know about Martin Luther and his the teachings he brought back into the church about salvation by faith, and he hammers his thesis on the door of the church, and it sparks the Reformation across Europe. One of the things that the one of the intellectual leaps, the theological leaps that Luther made, which we don't always talk about, is this idea of us being kingdoms of priests. So this has actually profound implications. If we are all kingdoms of priests, we all need to be able to read and access God's word. Whereas up to this point, you had this elite priest, ecclesiastical elite in Europe. The priests, the bishops, they could read. They read and but the mass was performed in Latin. The Bible was in Latin, and so the majority of people, there was a barrier to them being able to access the truth of God's word. So it wasn't just that Luther realized we need this is that we don't need the priest isn't this intermediary between us and God. It was this whole other idea that to be able to be truly a kingdom of priests, everybody needs to be able to access God's word. And that is a radical idea because it means educating the populace, not just a ruling elite and a religious elite. And this idea took a lot longer to implement than the Reformation. What Luther wanted to do was establish churches, schools across Europe at that time. And the work of this took a long time because it's one thing taking power away from a centralized Roman church and that then being dissipated across Europe in an ecclesiastical sense. It's a completely different thing for nations to be educating the masses so that they can read and write and access knowledge because knowledge is power. So really this role of the church in building education takes centuries. We still see it being worked out in the 18th and 19th century, where we have schools being established. People like Thomas Chalmers in Edinburgh, who sets up Sunday schools for the poorest of the poor children, so they can learn to read and to write. And ultimately, the goal of this is that they can access God's word, they can read the Bible for themselves. And we see it in the mission movements, we see where the gospel spreads, education spreads with it. The great tragedy is that in the our own time and our own culture, we're seeing Europe descend back into an educational dark ages. Um, really good book to get your hands on is called The Third Education Revolution by Vishal Mangalwadi. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Apologies if I've not. He's a Christian philosopher and has done a lot of deep thinking about this whole idea. So if you can get hold of his book, I really highly recommend it. But he said, a new dark age has descended upon the world. Secularism has robbed teachers of the respect that the church had bestowed upon them. Teaching is no longer a sacred calling. In the absence of divine revelation, universities no longer know what is logic or language, the difference between right or wrong, male or female, marriage or family, nation or justice, self and God. An intellectual revolution is required to restore the soul of education. Learning must earn the public respect as a pursuit of truth and virtue. Now, what does that mean for us as home educators? We are at the forefront of this, of being able to impart, again, truth and virtue into our children, because we've said it so many times, and so many other people that have said it. Education is not neutral. Education comes with a worldview attached. So the remedy is true Christ-centered education. Education that focuses on what is true, beautiful, and good, like what Paul talks about in Philippians 4:8 about thinking about all these things that are true and good and righteous, and that being the heart of education. We want to be educating the whole person, their mind, their body, and their soul. These things are not disconnected. We're not disconnected, fragmented people. We are embodied souls with minds that have got this amazing intellectual capacity that God has gifted to us, and that as parents we have been given the gift to steward our children in the forming of their minds and their souls. Education, therefore, is discipleship and stewardship. The 21st century education must be rooted in first century truth. Home education allows us as parents to gain control of our child's education and their moral formation. So we are got this amazing sacred work of pouring truth into our children to build them up. There's many different pathways to do this. There's many different educational models. There's so many different curriculums, and so many of them are really good. It's not that this one's better than that one or that one's better than this one. It's that finding what works for you as the parent and your child, but this idea of being really intentional in the stewarding of our children. They are precious in the sight of God, and we've been given the mandate from God to take the lead in their moral formation, but also their intellectual formation. At Rise Home Education, we want to partner with families to help them in this. We are not a substitute to the family. We are not an online school. We are people who are passionate about home educating and helping and empowering parents in that. So where there is gaps, where there is struggles, where there's areas that are just that you need help in. We want to be able to come alongside with amazing world-class tutors who can partner with you and help you on that journey, not just to gain exams, not just to get a qualification, not just to fill your child's mind with knowledge, but also to help with that moral formation, with that strengthening of their faith. As an online provider of education, we are leveraging technology to help bring Christ-centered education to teens. So if you want more information, please check out our website, check out the classes that we have, sign up for our newspaper, our newsletter, and subscribe to our channel or our podcast. Let's think a little bit more about this idea of education as discipleship. So many of you will be very much aware of the Westminster Shorter Catechism. What is the chief end of man? Man's chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. So this is such a central idea that has been distilled into the succinct question and answer that is within the Westminster Shorter Catechism. Christian home education builds this foundation of spiritual formation. It allows good habits to be built. Many of us follow the practices of Charlotte Mason. One of the big things that she spoke about was habit training in our children. The simple habit training of getting your toddler, let's pick up our toys, let's put them away, let's come and help mummy put the laundry out, help mummy fill the washing machine. Older children, go and do the dishes, go and tidy your room, make your bed, all these habits that we do day to day that seem very mundane, but this is part of the training of our children to have a disciplined life and have good habits. Part of discipling our children is to see work as an act of worship. And whatever you do, do it heartily as to the Lord and not unto men. Colossians 3:23. So that is the work of keeping the house, the work of doing the boring, mundane chores that nobody really wants to do. All of that can be turned into an act of worship. But also doing that maths exercise, applying our minds to good learning. Learn when our teens are doing algebra and it's hard and it's gnarly and they're struggling, turning that yes, it's hard and it's difficult, but God sees that hard work. God sees the discipline, and it can be used as an act of worship back to Him when it's turned around as that all things that we do, we're working for God and not just for man and not just for ourselves. That we're casting a vision for our children to see their role in God's great plan of salvation. I love that bit in Lord of the Rings when Frodo and Sam are climbing up the mountain towards Mordor, and they're just before Shelob's lair, and they're exhausted and they're tired, and Sam asks about, do you think, Mr. Frodo, that someday they'll write us into songs? And they talk about this idea of the great stories and how the great stories, the heroes had times to give up and to turn back, and they didn't. They kept going, and because of their perseverance and overcoming through difficulty and challenges, their acts are put into great stories that were passed down from generation to generation of Hobbit. And Tolkien has this idea that we're all part of this great story of God's working salvation and the redemption of all of creation. And each one of us in our own little homes has our own little part to play. And our children that are born into our families, they also have their part to play in God's great vision and great purpose of redeeming humanity and casting that vision that even this looks little, doesn't look significant. What's the purpose of doing this fractions problem, or what's the purpose of learning all about photosynthesis? But this, we all have our part to play in the education of our children, the forming of their minds is that little part, this building up, this foundation, all of it works for the glory of God. Paul wrote in Thessalonians, "For you know how, like a father with his children, we exhorted each one of you and encouraged you and charged you to walk in a manner worthy of God, who calls you into his own kingdom and glory." 1 Thessalonians 2, verses 11 and 12. Just like Paul is teaching the church in Thessalonica about how to disciple, how to build a healthy church, he uses the picture of a father with his children. And so, turning this back on itself, we see here a picture of parenthood, that we're this habit training continues. We do it with our little children. Pick up your toys. Come and help mummy with the laundry. Come and let's tidy up quickly, or let's help with dinner. All these different habits. But this continues through the teen years. We find it's so common that we want to build independent learners. It's a goal of home educating. We don't want to be sitting beside our 14 and 15-year-olds at the kitchen table going through their work with them. And sometimes that is needed, but we're wanting to move them to a place of independence. And with independence, that often means that our teens are not around the kitchen table with us. They might be in their rooms at their desks and they're studying away. And there is a separation that happens in those teen years. And with that, we can almost a disconnect. Sometimes it seems strange talking about that when we're home educating and they're with us in our homes. But the same, just with our little children, we want to be doing good habit training with their work, seeing that they're not just learning to do their maths, to do their English, to write this essay, to learn their Latin vocabulary or their French or vocabulary. They're training themselves for good habits that will stand them in good stead when they go into the world of work or when they have their own homes to manage and their own families to raise. This is the habit training in those teen years will be what they build on into their early adulthood. We're encouraging, exhorting, and guiding them to steward their gifts well. That they're not just it's not just for them. It's not just you might have an amazing footballer. It's just not just for their own fun, but that God's given them that gift and they need to steward the gifts that God has given them. But we also need to be comforting our teenagers. Remember, it's so important for us as parents to remember that the teen years are often some of the most challenging, that our teens can be really struggling and internalizing a lot of tension and a lot of problems. They might be really struggling with their work. They might be struggling relationally or just with the different hormone changes and having that place of great grace and comfort for them in the midst of their struggles. That you might have these big strapping boys who are like towering over you. I'm very short, my boys are big and they tower over me. They can rest their heads on my head. They're, and they come in, they're like talking with these big, deep man voices. But they still need that parenting and that comfort that comes with being at home and that safe space where they can make mistakes. That sometimes teenagers do really stupid things and that they know that there's a safe place where they can mess up and where they can be loved and where they can be shepherded back into the right path and that their messes are not they won't define them. They need that there is that just that grace and that stewardship and that shepherding of these our young life these young lives, these young adults, as they enter into adulthood and find their own way in the world. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope that has been of encouragement and is helpful for you with your own teens. And again, please hit subscribe, sign up for the newsletter, and if you any information about any of our classes, please get in contact. Thank you.